to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And currently, I'm teaching at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. But tonight, I'm in Colombo, Sri Lanka. So tonight's guest is Ed Hajim, author of The Island of the Four Ps. And we've had Ed before. And Ed, welcome. It's great to see you again.
Thank you for having me again.
Well, Ed, I really enjoyed the book. I'm not usually into fables, but this one was very well done. It kind of reminded me of Tuesday with Morrie, and so I very much enjoyed it. So let's start off with telling the folks about your professional background and how you got to where you're at right now. So if you can please tell us that, that would be great.
Well, I'm pretty much an example of the American dream, and I'm very humble on the fact that living at the right time in the right country has done wonderful things for me. Graduated at the University of Rochester, was a naval officer. I was a chemical engineer. And then I took a little bit of a left turn and went to Harvard Business School, shifted to the finance world, started out as an analyst, was a portfolio manager, president of a mutual fund. Then I met a man from E.F. Hutton. The chairman made me the senior vice president and head of the president of the brokerage part of the business, institutional brokerage. Then I shifted from there to Lehman Brothers, where I was a partner, member of the board of directors, one of the youngest members of the board of directors in the history of the 100-year history of Lehman Brothers. I was the president of the brokerage business for a period of 3 years, and then the president of the money management operation, chairman and CEO of something called Lemco, which was Lehman's money management area. And was doing such a great job at Lehman Brothers, I got forced out, and luckily got my dream job, which was to be the chairman and CEO of a very small investment bank called Furman Sells. Spent 20 years there. For the first 5 years, we grew it a few times, and I sold it to Xerox. We sold it to Xerox. Spent 5 years with Xerox. Xerox didn't want us anymore, so we bought it back. Sold it again to ING, the large Dutch company, at a fairly ridiculous price, and spent 5 years with ING trying to cement the company into their organization. It didn't work. I left, ran a hedge fund myself for 7 years, and then a hedge fund company for a while. I'm now the chairman, the non-executive chairman of an organization in Boston where the CIO is an old professor friend of mine at the Harvard Business School. I would say that that's my professional, but many respects along the way, I was the chairman of the board of trustees of the Brunswick School in Greenwich, Connecticut, the president of the Alumni Association, the Harvard Business School, and my last enterprise was the chairman of the board of trustees of the University of Rochester for 8 years. And during that period, we raised more money in those 8 years than they raised in the 150 years combined, and really caused an inflection point in the school. Although I was just riding side saddle, the president did most of the work, but I was there while it happened. Now I've gone into my profession is, I guess, writing a couple of books and trying to communicate ideas, which is a whole pivot for me because I lived most of my life in the camp of living happy is to live hidden. So that's a thumbnail of a professional career.
So, Ed, your book is very much, it's a fable, but it's about your life. Can you tell us how you grew up and what is central to this book?
Well, I grew up, as I say, the American dream. My father and mother got divorced. It's a long story. Mother got custody. Father then kidnapped me. She took me to St. Louis from Los Angeles. He kidnapped me, told me when I was 3 years old that she died and I would never see her again. And he was a merchant marine. And when the Second World War occurred, he basically got drafted or volunteered. So for the first 18 years of my life, we were together about 3 years, 2 years between 3 and 5, and another year between 10 and 11. The first 5 years after he left, I was in foster homes, 5 different foster homes, which basically ranged from, abusive and cold to warm and caring. When I after the war ended, he came back. We spent a year together in the YMCA on 34th Street, and then a hotel room in Coney Island. Couldn't find any land-based work, went back to sea, and I ended up in 2 orphanages. The second one was in Yonkers, New York, called Roosevelt High School, where 80% of the kids went to college. And I got an epiphany that the way out of my predicament was to go to a private college. kid from an orphanage and no money. How's he going to do that? Well, I luckily got the NRTC scholarship at my senior year. There was only 12 of them giving out in the country, and I did get it, and that changed my life and started my process through school and so forth. I hid my background for nearly 72 or 3 years. I didn't tell anybody. I was ashamed. I didn't want any advantage from growing up the way I grew up. But in my middle 70s, being the chairman of the board of trustees, they wanted to find out more. And then when Horatio Alger came after me and said that they'd like to, bring me out in the open, I decided that I would go ahead and try to put this on paper. My family put enormous pressure on me because my wife didn't even know the whole story, and my children didn't know it. So I started to write the book, and when I started to write the book, I started to find out a lot about myself, and I found out a lot about writing and what I could do. And I was going to print it just for the family, 100 copies, call it a day. When I sent out the information for blurbs, people came back and said, "No, this should be read by every freshman in the United States," and that's my presumptuous goal at the present time.
So why did you write this book in a fable format?
Well, all my life I've been fascinated by the ability of fables to communicate ideas. I mean, let's start with the Bible, Aesop's fables, Don Quixote, and then the modern ones like Who Moved My Cheese, which changed my life. Really sent a message to me. The Alchemist. So I thought I'd give it a try because I wanted something that was simple, digestible, where I could communicate an idea which wasn't preachy or teachy, but where people would basically be trapped into doing their own thinking. Fables, you read a fable and it's a simple story like Gulliver's Travels or Who Moved My Cheese, and you sort of take it and do your own thinking. And that basically the reason I wrote the fable. I got into it and I started to realize that I could send a message at many different levels in a fable, which you can't do in a self-help book. So that's why I did it. And so far it's been interesting to me. It hasn't sold 20 million copies yet, but we've got a few sold so far.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think you're going to sell a lot more because it's a well done book. What was your favorite fable as a kid?
Oh, well, as a kid, it was Gulliver's Travels and David Goliath because I was a little tiny guy. When I went into high school, I was 4'11", I weighed 80 pounds. So David and Goliath, having the little guy take the big guy on, and also I thought that Gulliver's Travels showing the little people working together basically could do a job. So those are my two sort of children's fables that I really got myself attached to.
And what can you give us a short overview of the fable itself, that the book you wrote? Just give them a short overview.
The short overview is basically I'm trying to contribute create a vocabulary for your inner voice. See, the constants of death and taxes is not true because the taxes you don't pay until your 20s and death only counts once. But the two basic constants are your inner voice and change. And when I've tried to give basically people a vocabulary, just like the famous Chinese medicine box, where they can put their ideas in those boxes and go back to them. And there are 8 words which are in this book. There's self, family, work, and community. Those are 4 realms of life. And into those 4, what I call buckets, I want to pour the 4 P's: passions, principles, partners, and plans. And I want people to basically go back to each one of these realms and each one of these areas like passions, principles, and partners, and sort of have them for a lifetime because they all change. And so putting it into a fable where a young man and later on a young lady arrive on an island, just like you arrive at the college for the first time. For the first time in your life, you're sort of in your 18, 19 years old. Your first time you have really control over who you are, because before that, your genes and your environment, both of which you have no control over, control who you are. So at 18 or so, you come to grips with who I am and what part of me do I want to keep and what part do I don't want to change. And I want that to be done formally. That's why this book, I have one beta site now where 70 students went through it. They decided who they were, where they wanted to go, and how they thought they might get there. So the book basically does that because the young man arrives on the island. He gets not a teacher, but a guide, takes him to these 4 villages. In each village, there are questions that he has to answer himself. The guide sort of leads him on the questions, but he has to answer them for himself, just like we all do. And I could go on, but I don't want to. My daughter who worked for TED Talk says, I always answer the questions too long, so I'm going to stop.
So, what's your process for handling change?
Oh, I think change is the only constant. And running a small investment bank, if you didn't change, you die. Or even I'm the lead director at our golf club. Every year you got to do something a little bit different because the world is changing. If you don't change with it, you won't survive. And of course, going to the University of Rochester, the perfect example is Kodak, and even Xerox. They both of them didn't change, and Kodak died, and Xerox almost died. So I handle change by constantly, well, first of all, reading, I look at Bloomberg every morning. I spend at least an hour and a half catching up with everything's going on. But I've also developed a number of groups because I think you can't do things by yourself. I have three groups which meet. Two of them meet weekly, and one meets monthly. That basically young people, old people, who are thinking about what's going on in the world. That keeps me up to date on change because I do believe it's very, very important. In fact, in my mind, it's the only thing that really counts. In my last book, or in my first book, the last sentence is, what's next? And I think that's the thing you have to constantly ask yourself if you're going to survive, especially if you plan on succeeding.
Yeah, no question about that. Why was the main character in this an orphan?
Because I guess the book is really about me. It's about my travel. And I was kind of an orphan. I didn't have a mother, and my father was only with me for three of the 15 years of my life. And I really was alone. And that's what this young man is sort of alone. But on the other hand, if you read the book, he does come to the island with a navigator and a captain who could be his parents. So you got it right. Mark, you have great insight. It was so I want to lean to people. There were other people there with parents, and this fellow didn't have that parent. But you could interpret it as parents. That's why I love a fable, because you can interpret it in different ways. I would say you're one of the few people that caught that. Everybody else thought that it was the navigator and the captain was his mother and father. So so you have convinced me that I'm right about a fable.
So why did you give this object a Tessa mark? The protagonist in the story received from an inventor type guide named Archimedes. And is there any significance to this?
Sure, everybody has a testimony. It's your brain, and basically, I want to convince everybody that over a lifetime you collect all this information, and what I want that person to recognize, the testmark does a good job of separating it into categories so you can better analyze it. Doesn't get too confused. It's confusing anyway. Life, as we all know, I'll use the cliche, it's complex. But on the other hand, if you can separate things a little bit, as you do with a testmark, and I think the people that I found were successful do separate the realms of life. They separate the passions, principles, and partners, and then they have plans. So I want people basically to understand that they all have testmarks already. And I think there again, with a fable, you can create an object which basically people can relate to rather than something, just an idea. And I do believe you carry a testmark around with you. You ask yourself, what are my passions? And you go to that part of your testmark, you press that button and it comes up. And then in many respects, what's nice about the testmark, it tells you that there's an interface between passions, principles, and partners and plans. And that's what basically the brain does.
In the book, you write about finding your passion. Is that the same as a calling? And is Marketus, did I pronounce that name right?
Right,
Marketus,
Marketus, right?
told to take his time. How did you find your passion?
Well, I think passions first come, and that's why one of the reasons I've written the book and passed on that. Passions start to come probably, you want to be a fireman or an ice cream truck driver when you're a little boy, but a little girl. But in some place in your high school, you start to pick up your passions. And mine were very simple. They were baseball and basketball, math and science, and girls. And what's interesting about passion is they start to morph. In college, the environment starts to impact your passions. And my passions changed. For a while, I wanted to be a physicist. I found out it wasn't a good idea. It's another one of my principles, test. I became an engineer, a chemical engineer. And then I was an athlete, and baseball and basketball were important, but after my freshman year, I felt, I wasn't going to be professional. I transferred that energy into extracurricular activities. And in one particular extracurricular activity, I found a real passion, a passion more important than all others. I didn't know it at the time. And I recognized years later. I created a humor magazine against everybody's. The president, the provost, the librarian, all were against it. but I took 30 people, I put them together to create this new product. And I found a passion. I found a passion of putting people together to solve a problem, to create a program, to create a product. And inside that passion, I found something even more defining myself. I really enjoyed helping people do better than they thought they could. And so those are the passions. Now, I found out as my business career, sort of in the middle of it, or maybe in the early part of it, I started to ask myself, why am I successful? I took one of those trips and I walked along the beach and I said, why am I successful? And I started to recognize my passion was to help people do better than they thought they could and to put these people together. And therefore, I was ready. I was really good for management, because that's what you have to be a good manager. You have to be interested in helping people do better than they think they can. So they think and know that you're interested in them. So those are my passions, and they do change. Look at this. Here I had a passion for the stock market and all kinds of other things during my 50 years on Wall Street. Now I've changed completely. That's what I'm telling young people in their lifetimes. You live to 100, 120, you're going to have to pivot another times, and your passions will pivot with it. I mean, again, sorry, a little long answer to a short question.
No, it was good. It was a good answer. Well, why is setting priorities important?
Oh, that's an easy one. You have as you said, we were talking before the program, before we got started here, you have two great limitations. One of them is time. As you said, I'll quote you, never get it back. The other one is energy, and you have a limited amount of time and energy. And with setting priorities there, you basically can then use your energy and your time on the most important aspects, the most important things. And some of the most important things are simple, some are complicated. But if you set your priorities, say, this is what I'm going to do, and you get that done, you're usually way, way ahead. It's like, when you start to work, some people don't take on the things that really have to be done because they haven't set priorities. They do what's in front of them. So setting priorities is using energy and time efficiently, which are the two most important, very limited resources.
Can you talk about the 4 questions in the Village of Passion and their significance?
Well, I went back and looked at that because you mentioned that to me, and I looked at them and I said, basically the process. It's a process. It's a process of looking at your passions. And you have to go through this process. What are your passions? Which one of them are most important to you? What are the areas of strength, skill, and talent? That third question is an important one because passions is a very overused word. It does include strengths, skills, and talents, and context. So which of them overlap? Passions overlap. You can have passions which are actually in conflict. And in answering these 8 questions, you'll go through the process that's necessary to sort out your passions, and then go back to your last question, set priorities to investigate your passions. I get a kick out of this because in my freshman year, I got very excited about physics, and I did take the advanced physics course in my sophomore year because I thought maybe my passion was physics. I got into the physics class, I looked around, and I said, wait a second, this isn't for me at all. These people are probably a little smarter than I am, but more importantly, they were more committed than I was. So I decided not to be a physicist. And that goes through my whole life. So those 8 questions on the end of the passion chapter just takes you through the process. Again, a fable plus questions allows you to trap your own thing. Some people won't even answer all the questions. They'll get done in the first 3 or 4 questions. But that's basically the reason for those questions.
Question from the audience. Hello, I understand your childhood was difficult, though I suspect it helped you build your inner strength. Did you have any non-parental mentors or people early in life that believed in you, or was that all your internal drive?
I had a number of them, but given the fact that I was treated the way I was, I had a great deal of difficulty trusting them. The most important one, there was a short distance. One of the foster homes had a wonderful family. I was only there 6 months, and she treated me just like her son, and it was a great experience. And they believed in me. They tried to get me to become a musician, and they were training me to do certain things, and they gave me clothes and everything. But the head of the orphanage, the headmaster of the orphanage, or whatever you want to call him, in the final place, was really tried to help me. And I pushed him off, but I took some of his advice. But I basically my disadvantages as a child became very much advantages, because having to adapt by yourself, you become very adaptable. I mean, I always kid about this, but I was in 4 or 5 different Catholic schoolyards, and you go from one schoolyard to the next, you learn how to adapt. But I think that's where the That's what comes from that childhood. I had people along the way trying to help me, and I owe this particular last gentleman a lot, because he basically gave me a small scholarship when I went off to Rochester. He believed in me, and he said, "You're going to make it." And he watched me all the way through. I also had a couple of high school teachers who basically were very much sort of non-parental mentors. And basically, you need that. If you don't have that, you're kind of out of business. And I didn't recognize it till I looked back, because I was I was angry, and I didn't trust anybody. Again, if you go through, as I did, 15 or 16 years like that, you keep asking yourself every day, why me? You get a little angry. And that, of course, something, I always say I got a lot of good things out of disadvantages. I learned perseverance, I learned reliance, and so forth and so on. But you pick up some negative stuff like anger, and I have to overcome that over my early lifetime. And I think I have, to a great extent. My wife wouldn't agree with it completely, but I got most of it out.
How do you teach principles, and why do we often hear the most successful people ignore principles that society may view as important?
I don't think anybody who's been steeped in any kind of like I was trained at the Catholic school, ever gives up the golden rule, or at least says, I don't recognize that, or the 10 Commandments, or things like that. There are some basic principles which we all have. Then from there on, the principles basically are your own. In other words, I sought freedom, which directed me towards smaller companies. I sought control over my life. Again, I didn't want to work for a large company where people were controlling my life. But each person will have to decide his own principles, and you pick them up over life. I used to put them on my wall. But this is in this idea of running a company. I came across a principle. Basically, you accomplish almost anything if you don't care who gets the credit. And I put it up on my wall because I really want to live that way. And I started to inculcate that in my daily activities. In fact, as I got older, I took that principle one step further, which was to deflect credit. Someone says, "Hey, Ed, you did a great job." Think immediately of who's helped you, and make sure you mention them. So what happens? You get a trifecta of goodwill. You feel good. The person who talks to you feels good. And when those people find out that you said something about them, they feel good. So the principles are picked up all through life. Some are, temporary. Like mine was not temporary. 50 years, I had the principle of living happily is live hidden. Stay out of the press. Don't go on television. Don't make any work on your company as the CEO. That was my game plan. And it was negative in some respect because having a public image was helpful in certain aspects. Today, I'm even giving up. I have an Instagram account, which my publicist says I have to have, because this particular aspect of my life, if I'm going to try to communicate ideas, I've got to go into channels where those ideas can be communicated. But principles are something that evolve like passions, and they are contextual, by the way. If you're in Kiev, it's different than you're from Greenwich, Connecticut.
Why is it important for us to challenge our belief system?
Oh, that's because of change. Beliefs change all the way through your life. I mean, the system changes all through your life. And with that, you have to modify your beliefs to some extent, because certain things you believe in the 19th century are totally, not useful today, and so forth, so on. Even the concept of longevity. You think if you're going to live 50 years, you're going to take a different approach to life than you can live 100. And so that I think that you have to constantly challenge your beliefs. Also, in business, in a sense, my boss at E.F. Hutton believed in the retail system. He said, that's all there is. And I kept saying to him, Bob, institutions are going to take over retail. And he would say, Ed, you're wrong. The retail's are always going to be retail brokers. And I said, you don't know that. And I had to leave Hutton to go to Lehman to pursue that business. And of course, institutional did take over retail. But his belief was retail. Kodak, of course, believed that their camera was going to last forever. That it was always going to be silver-based film. So you have to challenge your beliefs both, and also personally. You do things personally. Certain beliefs you have about the way you train children, that changes too. I mean, back in my day, boy, thinking about a kid being on a phone or something like that all day long, but you can't stop it today because all his peers are. So you change your belief in a sense. Hey, let's modify that, or any kind of a relationship. My wife, when she graduated school, she could be three things. She could be a teacher, a secretary, or a nurse. And if she was tall enough, she could be an airline stewardess. You're not going to tell your daughter that today. You got to change your belief.
Can you share a personal experience where collaboration played a significant role in achieving a goal? And I think almost anybody who's ever had any kind of success, and that includes Elon Musk and Bill Gates and all the others, they had great partners that helped them, or they wouldn't have existed. So how'd that work for you?
Third P. Third P is very simple. I have only been as good as the people I surrounded myself with. And it goes way back to my creation of a humor magazine. I had 30 people. I couldn't draw cartoons, but they had to have cartoons. In the Navy, you couldn't do anything without collaboration. You had to have a motivated team to get the job done. And of course, in industry today, it's ridiculous. There's nobody that can do all the things required. In fact, you and I can't even do this without some technician helping us with what's going on. So I think that there's, collaboration is absolutely necessary, and more so. Back in the early 50s after the war, there were some real individuals that could pull off, pretty much everything. I proved early on that I was not one of those individuals. In the 60s, I had my own mutual fund, and I was running the fund, and I was doing very well, and I was running the people, and I was doing pretty well. And then my home company said, well, you have to do your marketing. And I don't want to do marketing because it required a certain kind of energy that I'd have to dissipate other things. And I said, okay, I'll do it, because I was 32 and I can do anything. Turns out doing the marketing caused the end of my company, because I started to take my eye off the ball of managing the portfolio and managing people. So you can't do everything by yourself, by definition. And I do believe you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with. In my case, the right people, I succeeded. The wrong people, I either fail. And it just, look at my book, you'll see that when I failed, I had the wrong people, or I didn't have partners.
So that brings me to when you've collaborated with other people, no matter how good the group is, right? We see it in sports all the time, even championship teams, they face challenges. How do you overcome them as a team? How do you get people to rally when things get rough, even if they're super talented level-headed people?
You change the problem from my problem to our problem. You go back to the group and you say, we got a problem. How can we solve it? You draw from the group some of the answers. Obviously, you try to pick the answers you think are correct, but you do get their inputs. Everybody wants to have an input, and they're the only, you can't solve it yourself. In any organization you're working in, your group has to solve it. And if you can sense that they have the right answers and there's a little bit of consensus, you can pull along the naysayers, and then you're on your way again, teams working together. But I found when I had really difficult challenges, I called the group together and say, what do you think? How can we solve this problem? How can we solve this problem?
What strategies do you think are effective in fostering a culture of collaboration and mutual respect within a team, especially inspirations?
It actually comes down to, boring subject of leadership. You have to be right away, assume that you are the example. And I start way back when I reported aboard ship and had, 100 people reporting to me at age 22. And I realized right away that I was a model, and I had to have certain kinds of, behavior, or else, because they really pick it up. The old chief said to me, he said, Mr. Hajim, you have 6 months. If you pull it off, you pull it off. If you don't, you're out of here. And, because people wouldn't follow me. But I think that it starts from the top, and also physically recognizing that culture is the most important thing. I look back at my record, culture, strategy, people, numbers. That's really what you want to think of. And you want to have everybody think that's what you're thinking about. It's the most important thing is the culture. Culture basically is, what do you do every day that makes people believe that you're interested in them and in the organization? And I use very simple things. When I was the CEO of an investment bank, I had a lady that almost every day would tell me about somebody in the company was having a baby, getting married. And I use one specific example. One of my young people who I didn't know very well was giving his kidney to his brother. And so I made him a call that morning. And I wanted to do it, man. It was a natural habit for me. And that spread throughout the company that I was paying attention. So that's sort of some of the stuff, but it's really a leadership, and that's a little personal too. Depends who you are and how you approach things. Patton did a reasonable job. It's not my way of doing it. I'm much more of a consensus builder and a taker of advice and a delegator. So you kind of who you are and how you're going to lead.
Yeah, there's no one right way
No,
of doing
there isn't.
anything.
And also it depends upon context. If you're in crisis, you can make more definite decisions. If you got something running smoothly, you're a little more careful in making changes. My golf club today is running like a Swiss watch, so I'm tweaking a little bit. But when I came to Lehman Brothers, when the place was in total disarray, I made decisions. I fired this guy, hired that guy, and so on, and changed things. So that's a context you have to pay attention to as well. Or if your environment's changing rapidly, you may have to make quicker decisions which aren't 100% consensual.
Was Pete Peterson and I forget Gluckman's name. Were they
Glucksman,
the
yeah.
two running Lehman Brothers when you were there?
Peterson ran. He's the guy who hired me. Pete Peterson hired me. Then Glucksman became the co-CEO, and he and I fought for 7 years. In the book, it says Glucksman hated Hajim, and he did. I don't know what it was. Pete and I got along really well.
I met Pete Peterson before.
Peterson, but Glucksman and I just couldn't see eye to eye. He had a different way of managing, and he liked to fire people. He managed by fear, and he did a decent job of that, by the way, for a while.
Yeah, that's not acceptable today. Here's a question from the audience. What happens and what do you do to rectify when certain people in a group are driven by self-preservation rather than the greater good?
Well, first of all, any organization you get involved with, you've got to know your people, and that means resumes, backgrounds, families. You've got to know who they are, and quickly you will separate them into different kinds of groups. And those are the people you're talking. You have to worry about a few of those people. And here again, it is depending upon the industry. A very talented person with those kinds of characteristics, you may have to figure out how to put up with them. In other words, in the brokerage business, if you had a super talented analyst who every time he or she opened her mouth, the stock went up, you had to be very careful, even if they were sort of concerned about themselves, because you're running a business, and so you have to be careful. Now, if they get destructive, you obviously have to eliminate them. But getting to know your people, and by the way, when you get to know somebody really well, they appreciate when you can go in and say to them, well, not such a good idea. Try to do this. They'll appreciate that if you really know them well. And it takes time and energy. That's one reason when I was involved, I didn't do a perfect job, but I excluded certain activities. In other words, I didn't go out to dinner at night. So the next morning I was sharp. I didn't go into the press, which means I didn't have to prepare for television interviews and so on. I used that energy, and I believe they would have a limited amount of money, using that energy to really get to know my people as best I could. And I think that's really the name of the game. But you have to separate the people. There are team players. There's a bunch of books written on different kinds of people. Team players. There's the authoritarian type. There's the personal type. There's the meek, and so forth. So you separate them in the pods. And so when you go and talk to someone, you know the person, and you have to get something done. And it depends upon the situation. If you read Gene Wooden's book, he was all teamwork and focus.
John Wooden?
What?
The coach of UCLA?
Yeah, UCLA. The Pyramid of Success.
Yeah, I love John Wooden's
one of my favorite books. Yeah.
Yeah, I interviewed him when I was a sports writer.
Oh, did
you?
It's like
talking to God. Yeah, it was amazing. He was so knowledgeable about people and so patient. And I once interviewed Bill Walton, and I said, could John Wooden coach me? This was the 80s. And he goes, John, hey, my God, he coached in the 60s, the hardest time to ever work with young people in the history of the world. So he goes, yeah, John Wooden could coach anytime in any era because John Wooden, and he believed in people and he got to know people. And if he didn't agree with you, he listened to the other side of the argument. He said that's what made John Wooden great. So I'm sure that's the case. Yeah, can't touch John Wooden. For culture and building culture, how would you handle it today if you were CEO after the pandemic and so many people want to work from home? How do you actually build a culture when people aren't together on a daily basis to get to know each other?
Very hard. And again, this is why you have to pay attention to change. this is one change that I disagree with. I really believe that the great deal of learning, especially in most service businesses, belly to belly. Sitting in a room with a real professional who has been very successful, even watching the body action or the words that they say is so important. And you can't do that on Zoom, I don't think. But given what's going on today, there are certain people you're going to just want to do it. You're going to have to cope with them. So I guess you have to plan certain things. You have to work with the time you have. And I agree with this. Start off with saying we must have time together. Therefore, a minimum is 3 days. And then hopefully what will happen is you can develop examples of the successes you have in those 3 days and get it up to, again, a full week. Maybe it's going to be 4 days someday, because there may be some usefulness in spending time at home. But I found that this concept that you work better at home really is not true. Now, running a golf course, the business about people work better at home. Well, our golf course during the week in the summertime usually empty. During COVID, it was full. So it proved to me that these people weren't working at home. So I'm convinced that we got to change that. But you can't do it once you have a culture or a change like this in COVID, and people get used to that. You can't quickly go back in the other direction, or else you might break the system. So with the 3 days, and then start to use examples, show people how those 3 days become much more productive than the other days, and slowly but surely you get to 4, and maybe 4 is enough.
Yeah,
But I do
I just
believe
don't think that.
I do believe that people will recognize that, when they sit in a room with another partner and that partner brings up something really interesting, or just body. I remember Pete Peterson's body language and the way he handled clients and the way he did things, and I learned an enormous amount. Also, the way he treated people, and you can't get that over Zoom. I mean, the way people treat each other is, in the hallways, which you don't have. I find after a meeting, some of the most important things happen about 10 minutes after, when the guy comes running back in your office and says, "Hey, what about this?" You can't do it at Zoom. You're gone. You're on to another Zoom, or you're out doing something else. So I think that informal experience is very important. And I also learned more at 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning and 6 o'clock to 6:30 at night than I did all day long. So that's just personal experience.
Yeah, I think from also teaching that we found that Zoom and teaching people long distance, and it's only good if the people can't actually get into the school, because the students don't even like it. They prefer to be in school and mixing with their other fellow students, and they also tell me that they like the idea that they can just have coffee with the professor anytime and see him in person, and reading people's body language and connecting with them. You can't do that remotely, like you say. A day a week so you can focus on things without having to be in meetings, that's great. But to get to know people on a personal level just can't happen remotely. Can you discuss a book or an author that has significantly influenced your perspective on life or your personal growth?
Well, I think Lou Holson and John Wooden, both of their books were very important to me. The biggest change I think what's really affected me is Howard Stevens wrote a book, and I use a lot of his stuff in my book, called Just Enough. And I think the concept of
From
just
Harvard.
enough, it solves a lot of problems when you say that I got just enough money, just enough fame. By the way, just enough family, just enough self. You can overdo any of those things. I think just enough is a very subtle but very important concept, and it's one that develops over time. So this has been a great influence on my life, and I kind of passed that on. But the real, how do you get it done and how do you do it? I think Lou Holtz and John Wooden communicated more to me. The other fourth book, and you asked for one book, I'm sorry, but The Seasons of a
That's
Man's
right.
Life. Seasons of a Man's Life by Levinson. In a sense, to tell you that each part of your life has different aspects to it. And don't try to be a kid when you're 80, or don't try to be 80 when you're 15. So just recognize these change. And in each phase of your life, you take on different responsibilities. You have different capabilities, and you can do different things, and you should do those things and recognize, I had to give up skiing. It drove me crazy, but I had to do it. And if I busted myself up if I stayed doing it. At 80, 82, 83, time to quit, and time to do something else. And now I've got something else to do. So I think that's important. And so, but the Lou Holt and John Wooden, they really they took things and made them happen. I bet you those kids any other place wouldn't do quite as well as they did under those two guys. But Howard Stevenson, who I still talk to on a regular basis, he's a genius. I mean, and his ideas of the breaking life apart into different parts and just communicating just enough and building that into your system. So you stop you're working your company is doing super and you're paying attention to the fact that that's enough. Go over here, your family's starting to suffer. Go over and shift your focus for a period of time, or yourself, whatever that might be. And again, I also believe that the greatest satisfaction is in the fourth part, which is community, giving back. You don't have a complete life unless you give back. You know
that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Howard Stevenson, I was a professor at Harvard.
Mm-hmm. He and I, by the way, created you should look into this, a course called the Entrepreneur's Toolkit. He created it, he and Myra Hart. But we actually, those days, entrepreneurship at Harvard was just beginning. We only had a couple of courses. And I wanted them every 5 years to bring MBAs back to be redipped. And they be redipped in the Entrepreneur's Toolkit, which has become one of the most successful courses. It's been morphed a couple of times at the school, at the executive education school now. The course was morphed by a woman named Linda Applegate, and it's very successful now. I sponsored it originally and gave people scholarships to come, and nobody wanted to come.
You talk about observations in the book. Can you share an instance where observing a change in your surroundings led to a deeper understanding or an insight?
Well, I go back to the most glaring one for early life was retail to institutional. I sat there at Hutton and I said, retail is almost over. I said, this institutional is going to take over the whole business. And, and they're in the case of Lehman, they were building a 400 seat trading room. And I thought that was the next step in that business to service institutions. And E.F. Hutton was going to say, he called me up, he said, he said, you've done enough institutional. We got enough. That's enough. We don't want any more. You come over here and manage retail. So that was a very important observation for me. Also, I would say, in Nantucket, I decided to build a golf course. And here I observed that there was a latent demand for golf in Nantucket. And everybody says, you're crazy. Land's going to cost too much. Nobody wants it. And we sold out the whole place in about six to 8 weeks and built one of the great organizations here on Nantucket. And then we took the organization, the golf course, and now we made it the largest charity because I observed that basically there wasn't a lot of charity. There was some charity, but not a lot. And now we have almost 100. We'll have 100 kids, or 75 kids right now in schools based on our charity events. So looking at these different things in my lifetime, I found the next change allowed you to do certain things you couldn't do otherwise. But those are some of the observations. At Firm & Sells, it was constant. We were a small firm, and every year we had to look and find the next new thing. It's like I always tell people, we're jumping from lily pad to lily pad, and as soon as there were too many people on that lily pad, we had to get off because it was going to sink.
So I think this next question goes along with that. How do you differentiate between changes that require immediate action and those that necessitate a more reflective approach?
In general, you should never make quick changes unless there's some harm to come to someone or a system, because most quick changes are never very well thought out and usually can end up in really bad problems. So only if you see some harm, if you have to take action immediately, there's something going to happen right away, yeah, sure, you make that change. But in general, the reflective change, the consensual change, the change that basically has had thought, but not too much. I found much more fun in business having that kind of experience where it lasted a reasonable period of time rather than academia where it lasted forever. There's a difference about there's a definition of immediate. But if there is some harm going to come to someone, let's assume in a company you find someone threatening one of your employees. I rarely fire anybody, but I would fire somebody if I found that was the case. And I fired a couple of people in my many years at the Firm & Sells. But and also someone who's going to harm the system. In other words, I did fire someone who basically put us in jeopardy. I came one morning, he was long a position that could have really hurt the whole firm. So the fact that he had done that, he said, "You're putting me." So I said, "You're out of here right now." And there were 2 people in 20 years that I did that to, because he was jeopardizing the whole system. But in general, every change that you put in causes problems, and having more people involved in it and having more people understand why and for that's better. And that's what you call reflective, and I call it reflective as well.
What strategies do you employ to stay resilient and adaptable in the face of unexpected or significant changes in your life?
It's a constant process. Unfortunately, it makes you a little bit too serious, but you have to do almost every day to collect what's going on and assimilate it and put it into a system that you've collected. This, as I take one example, just your passions. If you have a certain passion, you have to keep collecting the stuff that comes in and make sure it's still in the same position it was. If it starts to change, you've got to pay attention to it. I must say, I spend an hour and a half at least every morning going over what happened in the world the day before. That's an absolute necessity. I have these 3 or 4 groups, and by one far right group, one sort of in the middle group, and one pretty left group that I talk to. So I get as much input. Then maybe that's what you're asking. I try to get that input as best I can. Then I have a few what I call I have very few mentors left. They've all passed away, but I still have some. I have some young mentors now, some people that I feel worth talking to on a regular basis. And it's boring, but you have to have it systematic. Call Steve once every 8 weeks. Ask Steve what's going on in this particular arena. And you do that regularly, and you end up with friends that will communicate with you. You open a conversation and so forth. But it's reading and people. People actually more important. If you can find some. When I was younger, I had mentors I touched base with in the business regularly. All people older than me, because they'd been there, done that, and so I could get from them, how it was when they were there.
What advice do you give to individuals struggling to cope with significant life changes or transitions? And I think that happens a lot as you eclipse 50 years old, and things are moving super fast now. Technology's changed, the way people are managed changed, everything's changed. So how do you tell people how to deal with that?
As best you can, test where you want to go. And as soon as you want to go, what are the requirements to get there? And it's usually education and training. Don't be afraid to stop everything and go back and get educated or trained or get involved in something. Take a lower level position in something you think that you really want to be passionate about or interested in. And it's very difficult. And if you have the capability, as one of my children did, hire yourself a career coach. She spent a year changing her job. She said, she was making very good money running a hedge fund, doing very well, but she felt that she just got tired. Didn't excite her. Making money for rich people was not interesting anymore, And so she decided, and she was a great writer and a great thinker, and so she hired a coach, and they spent time together, and they finally sorted out what was more interesting to her, put their hooks out, and found the next job. And so that's what you have to do. And sometimes, and you have to take a lower compensation usually, may even take a lower position. You can't go from president to president. You may have to go from president to vice president, but that's okay. Because if you catch the next cycle, you're going to be better off in the long term for yourself, because you're doing something you want to do, and for the system. So I believe also that it's important that you get the wind at your back. And that's what people, that this change that's occurring, they think it's negative. Well, if you catch the next cycle, the next wind at your back, it may have been better off hanging around with something that, is not working at this point in time. Especially when we work in a company where, something's starting to happen negatively. Work for an advertising firm or a magazine where the advertising is going down. You got to get out of there, go to the next step.
Yeah, look at Sports Illustrated and some of these name brand publications that when we were younger, we thought would be around forever, and they didn't adapt with the times, and now they're essentially non-existent. Going back to your fable, how do you think storytelling through fables or a narrative enhances the conveyance of life lessons and moral values?
Fables are not teachy or preachy. That's what's so important. They don't push ideas on you. They let you sort of absorb them. And by the way, storytelling this is not new. We've started. You read any of the religious backgrounds; they're all stories. If the Bible is one story after the other. But I find that on a historic basis, the fables have really communicated ideas that can be absorbed and expanded. In other words, you take an idea from a fable, you put it into your own system, and your own system expands it and makes it personal. So I think that the storytelling is one of the ways of getting ideas across more easily, and they stick. But remember, so many fables are fun too, as well. Like Who Moved My Cheese was a wonderful fable. It said a very simple thing: if you don't change, you die. And they sold 20 million copies, and I think people still talk about it. So I think that's why I try to write a fable which basically says to people, you have to have a vocabulary to talk to your inner voice to handle change. And here are some of the possible words you want to use.
And can you recall a fable or story from your childhood that left a lasting impact on understanding certain principles or values?
You know, if you took a fable, the biggest one I had was David and Goliath. I mean, it was really, to me, taught me that no matter how big you are, how strong you are, you've got to be smart, you've got to pay attention, and so forth. So that really was the fable as a child. Later on, Move My Cheese had a big effect on me. I mean, a big one. The Alchemist too, I think, had a big effect on me. But I think I just have been fascinated with fables all my life because they're easy. I'm a little dyslexic, so I was a slow reader. So fables are easier to read than some of the other stuff. And that's what they had an effect. David and Goliath was the biggest one. Gulliver's Travels, I felt that I kept reading it and I kept getting, and again, a fable can give you many different levels. You'll find out that you develop levels. You read it and say, I didn't realize that's what he said. You read the principles chapter of my book, that just goes on and on and on about what kinds of principles you can have and how each person looks at it differently. My blacksmith has a totally different set of principles than Archimedes does, and they sort of think back and forth, and I think it's really kind of an important thing. But that's sort of the thought process.
How do you approach learning from stories or narratives compared to traditional education or instructional materials?
Well, unfortunately, you have to do both because there are very few really good fables. I'll look through life, and most of my learning has come from institutional materials and technical manuals and so forth. You have to have that. Fables don't give you as much in history. They give you very little, if any, technical, which is, unfortunately, technology changes the world more than anything else. And very few fables handle technology. And technology has some, characteristics. You have to learn certain things. As an engineer, you got to know certain kinds of approaches and formulas and so forth and so on. And fables don't give you that. And there aren't that many fables. And that's why people don't pay much of attention to them, I guess. But, the instructional manuals have to be continually updated. And I found, most of my education, I would say, usually the percentage by 80% has come from, or even more, from institutional materials and technical experiences. But you have to do both.
In what ways do you believe the emotional engagement of fables can influence the application of lessons learned?
First of all, I think you end up keeping the idea in your head better than you would in any other way. But also with groups, it puts everybody in the same footing. And it brings out everybody's what I call trapped thinking. People look at the fable, they think about it differently, they bring it to the group, and the group then has a much broader look at the particular problem or idea that's being passed forward.
AI has become such a major tool for everybody. I mean, I find it to be almost now indispensable because it's so helpful in so many ways. How's AI changing the managing of people, and where do you see the greatest value for AI in terms of self-development?
Well, you go back to England in the 15th, 16th centuries, and you go with the troglodytes, and everybody's worried about us all getting put out of business. AI is going to create a lot of jobs, not as many as it's going to eliminate, but it's absolutely what AI basically is. It's making you much more efficient. It's the human mind times 100. It's very simple. And by the way, as you speed up things, and AI speeds up things, you also speed up the number of mistakes that you might make. And you find that AI today has a few errors, but there are certain parts of our system. For example, I don't know what the hell is going to happen to these young people at law firms. I mean, where they sit there and look at all those whole books, where an AI can do that in minutes, what took weeks and months and sometimes. So there's certain things will be eliminated. I think other things will be created. So I think that an AI is a great development. I think it's a little bit overhyped now because it's going to take a little bit longer. And I have Perplexity, and I'm looking at it. It does an okay job. It's fun sometime, but in many respects, Siri does a pretty good job too. And and Wikipedia does. In my mind, I want source of Wikipedia. I want other sources. AI is going to change the world. There's no two ways about that. The internet changed the world. I mean, my perfect example was when I graduated college. One of my final exams required 2,700 slide rule movements. 3 years in the Navy, and I came out, and there was something called a computer, 1961, and so all my slide rule stuff was worthless, So, but we went through that. Oh, yeah, AI is going to change us. There's going to be whole questions about it, but I think it's a great development because it again increases the human capacity to get things done. Medical science is going to be advanced significantly. You're going to need, many AI workers. These centers that they're putting together. Also, we're going to need a whole expansion in the electrical grid and a huge new energy situation because these AI applications require enormous energy. So we haven't begun to figure out what there's really going to be. But there'll be change, and this is what I say: you got to change. You got to pay attention to change. This is if you're thinking about going into the business of being a junior person in a law firm, forget it. Don't go there. Don't go anywhere near that. But on the other hand, there'll probably be something, the person who can adapt AI to the legal profession is going to be a big job and a good job.
Yeah, I tell my students now that, of course, AI is good for doing research, but when it comes to writing your paper, you need to write your own ideas, not rely on AI, because if you can't convey your own ideas to your boss or to investors or to whomever, they don't need you. So if your whole idea is to take the question your boss asks you and feed it into a chat or any of the others, Gemini, whatever you're using, and relying on that, you're basically saying, I don't, to your boss, you don't need me. And I think that's going to be a big issue with
You're
people,
cheating yourself.
especially
You're cheating
students,
yourself.
because we find
yeah. No,
we
you have to
find
answer
that
those
when we feed their papers
yourself.
in, huge amount of cheating based on that. Plagiarism is a huge problem. Uh, how often do you engage in self-reflection to assess your personal growth goals and values, even as someone who's been through it all like yourself?
I first of all believe in a written plan. I write plans for companies when I took over them. I write plans for myself, and I do I try to. We do it. Usually did it on a boat in the Caribbean every Christmas. Go through a reasonable dive every year. Go through my passions, my principles, my partners, and my plans. I try to go through myself, family, work, and community. I try to break that up. How am I balancing that really well? I do a reasonable dive once a year. Every 3 years, I recommend everybody, 5 years for some people, I guess, do a really deep dive. Go someplace where all the distractions are aside. Maybe the Adirondacks, or like we do on a boat, and take a walk on one of the islands down there for a full day or two. Keep doing that. Keep rolling through your head and writing down your conclusions. Start with that clean piece of paper. But I think you really have to reflect because change is, we've gone through this meeting today, change is so important. We've shown completely that this is something you have to deal with. And it is, I say, besides your inner voice, one of the real only constants in the world. And people who catch change, and I recommend that young people read biographies because you'll find out in almost every biography, the successful person has caught at least one change, and caught it well, had the wind at his or her back, and that took him in a direction. You got to be smart, but not that smart. If you catch the right wind, you got it at your back, you're in good shape. So that I use the 1 and 3 year, and I also use, when I was at YPO, they had meetings where you would go through this whole process. There's a fellow named Walter Green that had a seminar where I went to when I was after 25 years of marriage and started the first Monday morning. He said, okay, he said, 10 years from now, write down where you want to be, who you want to be, who you want to talk to, what do you want to see when you get up in the morning, and so on and so forth. And we said, what do you mean? That's easy. And 3 hours later, we had a lot of trouble. But that's the kind of thing. I'm right here. I want to get here. How do I get from here to there? I weigh 165 pounds. I want to weigh 150. How do I get from here to there? I would take 5 years doing it, but how do I do that? And then sort of it's like a Gantt chart. Figure out how you're going to get there. And Barbara and I said we want to live, looking out at water. And sure enough, after 10 years, we had 3 places where we looked out at water, because when the opportunity came to buy a piece of land in Nantucket on the water, we had that principle. We bought it and put it away, and turned out worked out really well. But that was one of the things. And who do you want to talk to? Who you want to talk to every day. Then you make sure you cultivate that person by talking to that person once every 30 to 60 days, or having dinner with them, and so forth and so on. After 5 years, now you have a friendship. And sometimes you do that well, sometimes you don't. But it is a planning process, and it's something you have to do, or else, as you said early on, 10 years go by, and poof, you haven't done certain things you want to do. And if you're not careful about yourself, go ahead.
I'm gonna say this hour went super fast, but it was all worth the time spent about your book, about your experiences, and keep writing. I'm looking forward to the next book.
I got one. It's going to be called "The Lessons on the Unlikely Journey from the Orphanage to the Boardroom." I'm not sure that's going to be the title. We've got this. It's written. It took me 10 years to write 3 manuscripts, and that's the 3rd manuscript. They have it already. We're starting to fool around with it. But I'm on this crusade of getting this done by young people, having the formal. There's a fellow named John Trullo Adams that said there are 2 kinds of education. One teaches you how to make a living. Second teaches you how to make a life. We do a reasonable job of the first one. We do a lousy job of the second one. I want kids to basically start to think about who they are, where they want to go, how they're going to get there, and maybe why they want to get there. And then when they graduate, they get a diploma and a life design written in pencil, because you're going to have to erase it.
No question. Thank you so much, Ed. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, especially on a holiday weekend. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Mark.